listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's broadcast. My name is Joseph Shepard. I'm an attorney here at WOLFSDORF Rosenthal, and I'll be walking you through the O-1B visa for individuals of extraordinary ability in the arts. Before we begin, I just want to remind everyone that you are in listen-only mode and you will be able to type any questions you have into your window. I will respond to them throughout the presentation if I can. Or if we don't have time, if we have time at the end, I will address them directly. And if we do not have time, you can send me your questions directly via email at jsheperd@wolfsdorf.com. So, jumping right into today's presentation. What is the O-1B visa? Well, it is a visa specifically designed to allow individuals of extraordinary ability, i.e. prominence, in any of the arts, and arts, as we'll see in a moment, is widely defined, to come to the U.S. to continue working in his or her field of endeavor. There is a requirement that you have an actual petitioner, so you cannot self-petition for the O-1 visa. This is true in the O-1A context, which is for everything else, basically science, education, science, education, sports, etc., and business. The arts, though, is a separate entity and a separate designation from the O-1A. O-1B is divided into two separate subsets, the arts and then the motion picture and television category, which is a separate subset for individuals of extraordinary achievement. Today, we will be talking about the O-1B arts only, i.e. those with extraordinary ability in any of the arts. And this can sometimes overlap with motion picture TV, but this is more in line with the visual arts, performing arts, but is not exclusive to that, as we'll see in a moment. The other key elements here, the beneficiary must obviously qualify. We'll go through in today in detail how an individual can qualify. The beneficiary must be coming to the U.S. to continue working in the area of extraordinary ability. Now, not in every case does the projects or itinerary or events that the individual will be coming to perform or work in require a person of the caliber of extraordinary ability. It doesn't hurt if it does, but nonetheless, it still must be in the same field. So, for example, a dancer of extraordinary ability coming to the U.S. to work in the field of makeup design or computer graphics or something similar would not necessarily work out because it's not in the same field of the arts. Written advisory opinions from a peer group or a management group or a labor organization as appropriate with expertise in the specific field of arts involved. So, what are the arts? Well, that is such a very broad and obviously profound question. Nonetheless, USCIS, the Department of Homeland Security, defines it as such. And it is any field of creative activity or endeavor, such as, but not limited to, nice lawyer words thrown in, the fine arts, visual arts, culinary arts, and performing arts. This is, a very wide range of things that can qualify in the arts. For example, when is a writer considered a person of business, extraordinary ability, or an artist of extraordinary ability? Well, that depends on the specific circumstances. In every case, you want to look at and identify whether or not the individual qualifies as an artist and therefore working in the arts versus qualifies as something else, perhaps in the field of motion picture TV or under the business O-1A category or even sports category. Nonetheless, it's important to remember that not just the principal creators and or performers, but their essential persons also may qualify under this category. For example, the directors, designers, choreographers, the conductors, the supervisors, the costume designers, makeup artists, stage technicians, animal trainers, magicians. The list goes on. and there is no end as long as there is a you know, ability to define what this field of endeavor and or creative activity is within the arts. So now that we know what arts is, what is extraordinary ability in the arts? Well, the short definition given, and of course there's never really one simple answer, is distinction or prominence. Prominence, someone who is renowned, leading, or well-known. A degree of skill and or recognition substantially above that ordinarily encountered. So this means that the person must be renowned or leading or well-known within the field, or aka prominent, distinct and prominent, above that which is ordinarily encountered. This is a lower standard than the O-1A standard, which requires the sustained one of the very few who have risen to the top. In this category, prominence is the magic word, and that, as you'll see as we go into the specific subsets of evidence to prove this, will be important. The reason that I bring up the O-1A category versus the O-1B category is because it is a common consideration among individuals as to whether or not they qualify under O-1A or O-1B. What are the advantages or disadvantages of either versus the other? Well, that depends. In practicality, there are not necessarily any benefits once you have the approval notice from USCIS and or the visa. However, the ability to acquire or obtain the approval notice really it depends on the evidence that you have as to your extraordinary ability or achievement, but in this case ability in the arts, and whether or not you meet at least 3 out of the 6 available criteria, or you have the one-time achievement. As you'll see, we'll go through the 6 regulatory criteria for O-1B arts, and you can think about how that would be different than the O-1A category, which has 8 available criteria. You must meet 3 out of the 6 in O-1B or 3 out of the 8 in O-1A. As you'll see, there are some overlap, but they're not necessarily the same. I'm not going to compare on the screen the differences between O-1A and O-1B, as these are short presentations. You can watch our prior presentation on O-1A, which was only a few months ago and is available on our website, www.wolfsdorf.com. Demonstrating extraordinary ability in the arts. So, as I mentioned, there are 2 ways that you can meet this requirement. The first is through the one-time achievement, or meeting 3 out of the available 6 regulatory criteria. One-time achievement, what is that? Well, if you're nominated for or the recipient of a national or international award or prize in that particular field, examples listed within the regulations are the Academy Award, the Grammy, the Directors Guild Award, an Emmy. So you would want to have received or been nominated for an award or prize of this caliber. How significant? Well, the examples listed are just that, examples. So you can think of, well, what would the equivalent of that be in other countries? Because it's clear that they said national or international. So a national prize or award, perhaps, let's say, in the music industry, we have the Echo in Germany, which is the equivalent to a Grammy. The Brit Award, the equivalent of a Grammy in the UK, and the Juno equivalent of a Grammy in Canada. So those are just some examples. They can be national, and it doesn't. Whenever we say national, we don't necessarily mean USA. It can be any country's national prize or award. If you want to think about international prizes or awards for excellence or ability in the field of endeavor, I would imagine a winner of the Eurovision, for example, may qualify under this category. Nominations count. So if you were nominated for a Grammy or a Echo or a Juno or a Brit, and you are in fact named on that award or nomination, it's not just a team of which you are on. In practice, that's the general gist. There, of course, are some exceptions depending on the particulars of the field. But in general, that is the requirement to meet this one-time achievement. More often than not, petitions involving the one-time achievement will also feature additional evidence of the person's prominence in the field, and we love to use the word sustained prominence in the field over time to demonstrate that it's not just a one small flash in the pan, even if it is a very recognizable international or national award. However, more often than not, individuals applying for the O1 in the arts will be looking for meeting 3 out of the available 6 regulatory criteria and or comparable evidence, comparable or comparable, however you see fit to pronounce. We'll go through now some of the ins and outs of the 6 regulatory criteria and just briefly touch on some of the things that one would need in order to put together a successful O1 petition to show extraordinary ability in the arts. Listed here are the summarized versions of the regs. This is not exact language, but it gives you an idea of what we will look for. Lead starring participant and lead starring or critical role, as you can see, the first and the third of the bullet points here have some overlap, and we'll talk about that and discuss how and why that can be addressed. National, international recognition, you can just really read that as press. Record of major commercial or critically acclaimed successes. We'll talk about this and one of the common pitfalls of putting together evidence for this category. Significant recognition from other experts in the field of endeavor, and substantial remuneration or pay in comparison to others in the field. So, lead starring participant in productions or events which have a distinguished reputation. This is usually evidenced by things like, well, press again, but also critical reviews, advertisements or publicity releases, publications, contracts, endorsements. This is relevant because it's 2 parts. Number 1, lead starring participant. Number 2, distinguished reputation of the production or event. A production or event in general can be a project, exhibition, convention, lecture series, so it can be one small piece of it, or it can be the larger whole production of these appearances. An exhibit, an opening, a showcase, an academic year, or even a private engagement of which one was contracted to perform or show. So this goes hand in hand with the third, which I will jump to momentarily, about lead starring or critical role for organizations and establishments that have a distinguished reputation. Okay, so you can extrapolate and back up from who were the events or productions with. What were the galleries or restaurants or studios or private funders or private clients or museums which hosted or threw or orchestrated the critical production or event. You can use those to, whenever you're looking for and gathering evidence to support both, number 1, the lead starring or critical role, or the lead starring participant. Evidence may be, critical reviews about the production, and it may mention that it is being thrown by the, X restaurant, which is, of international renown. All the top chefs at restaurant X can demonstrate and have gone on to do X, Y, and Z. So your evidence can be used to showcase more than one element of each criteria. And this does get quite, scientific and precise, but at the same time, less is more. And if you can show and use that same evidence more than once, it is helpful. and you can reference it more as you go through the petition. Now, like I said, otherwise, the person does not have to be hired or selected because of their extraordinary ability for each of these specific projects by each specific organization. But if they are, it doesn't hurt to show that. But just remember that it is not a specific requirement. But if you are going to argue these two criteria, the organization's establishments as well as productions or events, it is important to emphasize and remember that you will have to demonstrate both that person has performed services and has performed in a lead, starring, or critical role, and will do the same for both. So if you're arguing these two criteria, you also have to show that the future productions, events, organizations, establishments will have or have distinguished reputations. Now, that's actually more often than not impossible. There's generally not press about the distinguished reputation of a production before it occurs. However, that's whenever, putting thinking cap on, you can demonstrate the distinguished reputation of the players involved within that production, event, organization, establishment. This organization establishment has produced 12 recitals that received critical acclaim, so there's reason to believe that this one will also be successful. This involved this composer, and this composer will be performing for the first time with this orchestra, etc. You can put many different types of combinations together to show the future, but just remember that USCIS will want to see at least some mention of, or at least some way addressing the has and will element of both of those. Moving on to criteria number 2. This is national or international recognition for achievements, as evidenced by, like I said earlier, press. So this is critical reviews or other published materials by or about the individual in major newspapers, in trade journals, in magazines, or in other publications. Other publications, that's, this is a way, not necessarily written in order to provide this, but it does allow for online media. Online media is a publication. But the publication matters, and why I say that is, evidence of the person's appearance within press alone doesn't necessarily indicate that the person is prominent in the field. There's a difference between being mentioned in, say, the New York Review of Books versus, say, the local tabloid. What I mean to say really is, it's if there's a wide distribution and readership, and or the readership is relevant. If it's a trade journal, if this is a publication that is read by all individuals within this subset, and it is widely respected, highlight that and provide evidence of that. The most publications in mainstream media, at least, will have press kits within which you can request, and they'll have readership and distribution info. For online media, the same. They'll show independent views, number of clicks per month or per week, or by location, etc. There's no shortage of ways you can show that appearance within this press is relevant and goes to show that they are nationally or internationally recognized. Because if a publication only has a small readership or distribution, that does not necessarily connotate at least national recognition or national readership or distribution or views, then it may not qualify. Important to note here too is the nature of a person's appearance within the article. If the article at least has some information about the artist, that is sufficient, and USCIS then can can use that and has the discretion to decide whether or not this is of value. It does not have to, article does not have to be primarily about the person or something similar. There is some leeway here. You know, it's not that the article, the content of the article in and of itself connotates the national or international recognition, although that's great if it does, but the appearance of the person or the person's work in this press in and of itself goes to show the national or international recognition. And if you hit both, that's fantastic as well. So in a nutshell, this is press, and it's you know, can be critical reviews, it can be trade journal in papers, magazines, online media, etc. Now, similarly, and along the same vein, is the record of major commercial or critically acclaimed successes. This is the fourth of the 6 criteria to establish extraordinary ability in the arts in the O-1B context. This is what are the indicators of commercial success in your field? So, you know, box office receipts, ticket sales, album sales, critical reviews, book reviews, book sales. Digital and social media metrics matter nowadays. You know, as we progress onto the online world, USCIS is in tune with that, and they are taking into consideration things like you know, digital music sales or social media hits or views, things of that nature. Whether or not a person, like I said earlier, I gave the example of a writer, let's say, but what about the you know, online media personality types? This is where this may come into play. How many YouTube views has this person had? How many likes does something have? An article, a video, or even just the idea or a page. These are things that do matter. And like I said earlier, with documenting why the publication matters, document why the metrics matter. You know, that is the second step. You can present box office receipts of X, but if there's nothing to compare that against, it's not helpful. Similarly, if you have, you know, somehow explain why, you know, 70 million likes on Facebook would be relevant whatsoever to someone's commercial or critically acclaimed success. When you put all these things together, they form a record. And I think that is one of the common pitfalls for individuals trying to meet this, this one criterion. The regulation calls for a record of these major commercial or critically acclaimed successes, not just one. So putting together these things over time shows the record. And one of the more controversial subjects of the O-1B arts is the reference letter category, and often too much emphasis is placed on this criteria. There was a recent, I believe, Hollywood Reporter article written about this topic and addressed that sometimes these petitions can be, you know, heavily reliant upon the reference letter. USCIS doesn't take into consideration reference letters if they're just on their own. I mean, they can take them into consideration, but they discount them unless they're really corroborated by something else. More to the point, too, reference letters, while helpful, and they are evidence, you know, testimony is considered evidence, the reference letter criteria itself should not form, just in practice, and this is anecdotal, and this is also just my opinion, not necessarily the opinion of anything wider than me, but I don't believe that they should form the backbone of the petition itself. I think they're helpful if they say helpful things and you know, don't go on with too much say fluff that may distract the reader from getting to the point. But you know, nonetheless, they are helpful to some very small extent and in small doses. I would say if people are willing to write and provide these letters, fantastic. It is a criteria, and there's no reason not to fulfill another extra criteria. However, I don't think that they should be the focal point, and to the extent that they are provided, fantastic. That is one more criteria. You know, they can be helpful too if people mention things about, say, you know, a specific trade journal or article that the person was featured in, you know, as being significant or important, or that their certain achievement maybe received a lot of press in another country of which there's not many English language translations or versions of, you know, things of that nature. However, you know, I would say they should be, you know, there are 6 relevant criteria for this section, and I would say, you know, think of that proportionally. They're potentially 1/3 at most of the evidence, but even then, I would say 1/6 of the evidence. Reference letters are great and helpful, but they can also be distractions. Substantial remuneration from, in comparison to others in the field. I think that this criteria is best discussed in the form of contracts. You know, what has the person received? What is, you know, verifiable, you know, concrete evidence that something occurred, that proof that it did. You know, if someone received a multi-million-dollar record deal, then a copy of the contract or a copy of the deal memo summarizing the essential terms of the agreement, or checks that they received, or prizes or awards that came with money. And then how is this in comparison to others in the field? Well, I think that, you know, wage data and surveys can be helpful. I think that, you know, as long as you have that first round of verifiable independent evidence upon which to use as the basis of comparison, that's great. But if you just have, you know, the wage data in and of itself, it's not that helpful. You're just showing what everyone makes around the country or in a specific geographic area. That doesn't necessarily prove that the person has or will receive, more likely than not to be true, that the person has or will receive remuneration in, in comparison to others. And this last of the criteria is not a regulatory criteria, but it's the comparable evidence criteria. When at least one of the criterion, the 6 above, do not readily apply to the beneficiary's occupation, you may submit comparable evidence, you know, in quality and for purpose, must demonstrate that the beneficiary is also an alien of extraordinary ability in the arts. So what in the world does this mean? Well, the first part, it does not readily apply to the beneficiary's occupation, is quite a daunting task just in general in the arts. As we've seen, there is never going to be a shortage of experts. However, let's say that maybe that in this field of endeavor in the arts, there is not a really variation whatsoever within the remuneration or any remuneration received. That's one possible way. Or if there's not much press about it, I don't know. I don't know how that would go over. If there is, you know, no productions or events or organizations or establishments with distinguished reputations, that also may be indicative that this is not going to be necessarily that successful. But unless or until this specific requirement that it be not readily applicable to the beneficiary's occupation, you can still show that if maybe the evidence you have, and we always suggest and do present this, if the evidence you have that you're proposing to submit does not readily apply easily to one of the available criteria. A fun example that we like to give sometimes is the person's face was put on a country's stamps. You know, there was an entire series of stamps issued with the beneficiary's face on them in their home country. It doesn't necessarily fall within one of those easily criteria, but it certainly does demonstrate that they are a person of extraordinary ability in their field of the arts. So that's just an example, but there are plenty other examples where this could fall in. And the comparable or comparable evidence criteria may be used to bring the total up to 3. Remember, you had to meet at least 3 out of the available 6 regulatory. So really comparable gives you a shot at bringing it even higher. And of course, in every case, if you have any evidence that does not easily fit within one of these criteria, absolutely it can be shown and should be shown, because in the totality, the officer will look at everything together, and in the end, even if you have one piece of evidence in 1, 2, and 3, and that's it. And if the officer's looking at that at the end in the totality of the circumstances and says, well, I don't think that actually shows prominence. You gave me, 2 news articles and a, 2 news articles and a critical review. And there would be a lot more evidence in the back picture that should and could and should have been included. That is a very likely trigger for an RFE, if not denial. So, the O1 petition, when all said and done, should include as much relevant and reliable and helpful evidence as possible. This brings us to the end of our half-hour presentation. I wanted to say thank you very much for your attention over the past 30 minutes. If you have any questions, you can email me, Joseph Shepard, at jshepard@wolfsdorf.com. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.